Hey, and welcome back. Today, in our series of Show Off Your CI/CD pipeline, I'm going to talk to Rob, Rob, we haven't talked before. Who are you? What are you doing?
Well, been around for quite a while. I'm currently the chief architect at a company called informediq.com, and I'm kind of helping to direct the overall kind of technology trends for both the software and the infrastructure. So that's my quick one.
That sounds like an interesting role. Do you actually still get to code some stuff?
Yeah, well, yes. And so I've been doing a lot of coding, and I try to do like little POCs or kind of show how to use a new technology. All the serverless stuff that we're using is pretty new, and the stuff we're talking about, I did sort of the first POC for the Monorepo CI/CD stuff. So yeah, I get to.
That's cool. I see a lot of architects that don't get to code anymore, right? So it's great to hear that you still get the chance to do so. And do you want to tell visitors or listeners a little bit on how did we meet, right? So we didn't know each other before. It's the first time we talk in person. So how did we get to know each other?
Well, we are both members of the AWS Community Builders, which is a wonderful community. And you get to meet cool people like this and get to ask questions and learn about the technologies as they're coming out. I found it to be a wonderful community to be part of, because you have these spontaneous meetings and stuff like that. So I really
yes, I see the same. It's a possibility to share and exchange knowledge and also to learn from each other, right? And I think this is what this is today about as well, right? We want to look at one of your projects, and I'm really excited because it's something I've never done myself before. So what are we going to look at today?
Well, so we're going to talk about kind of our learning curve of using a monorepo as the basis for a serverless architecture that's pretty complicated, that has many lambdas, and figuring out how to do CI/CD with that in a polyglot way. So there's a lot of stuff going on with Node with monorepos, but it was really hard to find things about like Python-based ones and ones that we have a combination of Python, Ruby, and Node and Terraform, all in the one monorepo. So getting that to work is kind of what we'll talk about, and has been the interesting challenge for the last 9 months for us.
Awesome. So from a tech stack perspective, we're looking at infrastructure as code done with Terraform. We're looking at a monorepo, a CI/CD pipeline for the services that are part of that monorepo, and those services are mainly built in Python, is what I'm hearing, and that's what we're looking at.
Python is our main language now. The company has kind of moved from Ruby. So this monorepo project was started off as the beginnings of a major transition from kind of our original distributed monolith that had a Ruby Rails core to a pure serverless architecture that's hopefully better, and it seems to be. So Python, Ruby, and Node now, plus the Terraform for the infrastructure as code.
Oh, cool. So what is the CI/CD system that we're going to look at today?
So we're based on CircleCI, and that was actually the main enabler for us to be able to do a monorepo. And that's probably the main thing we'll be talking about, is how that worked.
Okay, then let's get going. So I'm gonna just quickly do my stuff in the backend. So feel free to share your screen now.
Okay. And start. You want me to do the business value thing?
Yeah, let's start with that one.
Okay, let's see. I've never done this with a presentation. Okay, why is it? Uh-oh.
Now it's going to tell you need to restart your Zoom.
I think so, even though I've always had Zoom. What's it doing? Oh, yeah.
That's not a problem. I'm gonna pause the recording for a second, and we'll do
Okay.
that edit stuff. And
Let's see if it.
now,
Okay. Cool. So just a quick view of what we're doing as Informed. We basically do instant verifications of consumer and credit and auto applications. So our main customers are banks and lenders. They can upload loan applications and the documents needed to verify the application. And the big thing is it's a huge range of different types of documents. And we use machine learning and heuristics to do the classification, extractions, and data. So we're primarily an ML company. And we don't just look at the documents, we actually verify the lender's stipulations against all these documents. And we return the verifications, not just the documents. And this dramatically speeds up their ability to approve loans and things like that. So that's basically what we do. You can think of it as a pipeline of application and document processing that ends up with a result that says yes or no, this person meets these stipulations. So that's
this sounds cool. Can I ask one question? Because I do work for FICO, which is the credit risk score company. Do you integrate to retrieve that score as part of that loan approval process?
So no, we don't do that because the banks themselves, that's their thing, right? So they have a direct relationship with a FICO or whatever. But we do other things, like we integrate with Plaid to get bank statements and a few other things like that, where we can. It's more about us getting documents about the from the customer, from the borrower, and use that to verify income or verify where they live, all the things that you need to, when you go to get a car, you have to fill out 1 million, well, here in the US at least, you have to fill out 1 million forms and prove that you exist and have the money and stuff. So that's what we support, that part of it.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Thanks for setting that intro. Now let's move over to technology and let's move over to code at the end. How does your pipeline look like? What do you cover as part of your pipeline, and how do you actually do the deployment?
So just at the kind of high level, these are the kind of technologies that we use. We've got the CircleCI, and we're taking advantage of 2 features of CircleCI that allows us to implement it in a monorepo. Because the big thing about a monorepo is when you do, like in a regular repo, when you do a change, that triggers the CI. But in a monorepo, you only want to trigger a change in some sub-project. So like on the right here, there's it's kind of showing the structure of the monorepo. It's a little bit simplified, but basically you see all the services. Each of those services are a separate service, and they're a separate project. And you want, when you change, let's say the API handler, you want only the build for that to happen most of the time. And there's a similar pattern for the Terraform. So these mechanisms, dynamic config and path filtering, are the techniques that are available in CircleCI that's a little bit unique, and I'll go into more detail on that, that enable us to do this, where we can trigger the CI based on get changes only in sub-projects.
Yeah, I've been fighting the same with Jenkins, because Jenkins does not really have that possibility, so I'm really eager to see how CircleCI solves that problem.
Yep, that was like the major breakthrough. And again, like we talked about, it's a polyglot monorepo. We're using, in Python, we're using poetry for the build. And the target is a pretty much pure serverless architecture for AWS with Lambdas and DynamoDB. So that's kind of a quick summary. And just talking about monorepos just a little bit. As I mentioned, this was part of a project where we migrated from our legacy distributed monolith to a pure serverless. And monorepos is pretty common for large companies, but there really wasn't that much tooling. So, but we figured that the serverless really was driving us to do a monorepo, because we already have tens of Lambdas, and we're expecting it to still grow dramatically. I did have a good experience once before at a previous company, but that case we had the situation where we had really great senior developers who just naturally built their own tooling. Here we have a much broader range of developers and kind of really had to deliver something that they could just use. So like I mentioned, the CircleCI features are really what's made this all possible, and it's so far been working out quite well. It's like no one's complaining, and they seem to be using it every day, so it's really good.
Cool.
So these are the main features that allow us to do this. It's really a combination of what they call dynamic config, which is where you can dynamically generate or select the config that'll happen based on looking at what's changed. The path filtering is what figures out what's changed. So you basically have a top-level configuration file that's at the top of the, let me just show you. Like here we have the top-level CircleCI that's at the top of the repo. And that one gets fired off first, and then it can effectively dispatch based on the change, on what files changed. You have basically a map of files, and I'll show that in a moment, that determines which actual CircleCI config in each subdirectory gets called. So that's the basic mechanism. And when I show you the actual UI of CircleCI, you can see how that worked out. We also have the ability, so most of the time you just, you do a git change in a subdirectory, and that'll trigger the pipeline. We also have the ability to trigger from a CLI tool, and we use that mainly to trigger deployments and promotions to different stages, like from dev to staging to QA to production. So CircleCI has this concept of orbs, which are basically encapsulated, it's like a packaging system for CircleCI. And there's a whole community of, there's both ones supplied by CircleCI and community open source ones. And these two things I mentioned here, buffering, split config, and CircleCI path filtering or orbs that we use to implement this.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
No, I think I'm good. Though the orbs serve as worker nodes at the end, or
no, they're not. No, it's more like a code level thing, and I'll show you when we look at the code. But it's really like a module system for the CircleCI code. So you can either make your own orbs or consume orbs, and there's it basically makes it so you have shortcuts in your in your YAML so do things like it knows how to build Python things, and it'll automatically give you S3 commands or AWS CLI commands, stuff like that.
Okay, got it.
So this is kind of the big picture of our pipeline, like doing everything. We can so it's kind of showing from the point of you do a PR merge to main is the main thing we use to trigger the full pipeline. You do have the option of selecting either just doing a infrastructure deploy or a code-only deploy, or both. And this example is showing a full infrastructure plus code deploy. We separate those because normally you only have to do infrastructure deploys when you change your infrastructure, but most of the time, as a developer, you're just changing code for your lambdas, and all you want to do is update the lambda. But in this case, we're showing a full thing, and this represents the process for, let's say, a lambda, a service. So you make a change in the service, and you do a PR merge. So it needs an approval, and once you do a merge to main, it triggers this. Pipeline.
So this pipeline will then essentially run on the main branch.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, do you do any pipeline execution on the feature branch or on the pull request before actually executing the main pipeline?
So you can trigger. So on just regular branch pushes, it only runs tests and things like that. But you can, as you see here, like there's that little person in the upper left corner, you can trigger a deploy with a branch. So let's say you want to deploy to dev, or we'll talk about, we don't quite have individual sandboxes yet, but when you do, you could use this to deploy to a sandbox as well. So that would be how you would do a branch, because you don't always want it to trigger on a branch push. So we have a way that from the command line you can trigger this on your existing branch.
Then the developer can take the decision, I now want to push from a branch and test this out before actually bringing up the pull request.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, in the developer lifecycle, do you have pre-commit hooks or something installed in these Bitbucket environment or GitHub environments?
Yeah. So we have some, and that's an ongoing set of improvements. So today we do things like we just pushed out, doing like black formatting for Python, and the Terraform has more. So we actually now have a platform team, and they really strongly believe in all that stuff. So for the Terraform, there's a bunch of pre-commit hooks.
Okay.
To get that cleaned up.
Okay. Good. So that I think that's something that we don't see as part of the CI/CD pipeline usually, but it somehow belongs to it from my perspective, which is why I was asking that question, right? So do you run unit tests locally, or do you run them through a pipeline? That's a conversation or question that everyone answers with his own flavor. So I hear that you are doing that mainly then with local executions of the unit tests on a branch. So
I'd say that one place we're not super fabulous is test coverage, but what we do have is so for us though the testing does happen in the CI pipeline. So it's not a pre-commit hook we're mainly using for linting, formatting, checking certain things, but not tests.
Okay, awesome.
The developer can run tests. But this gets into another conversation when you're doing serverless, is setting up things so that what should you do local and what really has to happen in the cloud. And we're mostly happening in the cloud, and we're working on ways to have some stuff happen more locally.
Yep, I know that discussion, and it comes up in serverless different usually than it does for other deployments or kind of deployments, right? And also, what I see is trends that people that do their own kind of project try to look at that with different eyes than enterprises do, and I think this is also really interesting. So eager to talk more about that, but that's not the topic today. So let's jump into your code, right? Let's look at let's look at how this actually looks like from a coding perspective and how the configuration in CircleCI is done.
Okay, so so you could just see here though we basically have the two stages, get things set up, and then we have the first section is the Terraform, pretty much just doing Terraform plan. We have a manual approval step after the plan, and then the Terraform apply. And then the last line is the code build, and the code up, deployment to the Lambda. Let's see. So I'm going to have to switch. So just kind of give a quick overview of the design of the system. We have several high-level products. They talk to our customers. So the main one has API access. We have kind of a pattern that's repeated recursively, where we have an orchestrator that takes in its inputs and orchestrates all the different stages. So these connections are primarily event bridge connections. They're triggering these other lambdas that may update, or this is pulling data in, and then we have these recursive subsystems. This is now does the document processing, which again has the same pattern of an orchestrator and lambdas with sending data at S3 and having further recursive subsystems. So anyway, each of these are the lambdas. These are the services that we're building and deploying with the CI. So I wanted to just show that. This is the CircleCI UI, and I'm showing just some main. So if we look at these top, document orchestrator is one of the services. And we can see that there's always this 2 steps. There's the setup config, which pretty much does that decision and splitting to generate the config. We won't really look at this because this is the generated version where it's kind of mushed them all together. And then we have the actual work. So that first one happens at the top level CircleCI config, at the top of the repo, and then this one is being triggered, is running the CircleCI config that's in the subproject. And this first section, all this one is doing is basically kind of setting things up. It's like doing git tag stuff.
Setting up the environment that you need essentially to do your build at the end also.
Yeah. So this is more like just kind of doing more like git tag work, just to kind of make sure everything is kind of got the right tagging. And then we have the, okay, now we start doing work here. So this is the infrastructure as code pipeline. So you can see that it's pretty much, again, doing a little bit of setup. We store the versions in SSM, and I'll show that in a little bit where we can use that as a way to kind of track what's been deployed. And then basically it's just running the Terraform plan. And then
and then there's a manual approval is what you said?
Yeah, so here's the manual approval.
Okay.
Yep. And then it's just running the apply. So it's not very exciting, but we can do this for every service.
Okay, cool. Let's have a closer look on that decisioning around the monorepo. So if you go back to the overview was seeing all pipelines. Do you have, for each of the services that is part, will you see one pipeline, or will you see one pipeline for all services?
No. So if you see, like, basically this document orchestrator, that's a service.
Okay.
And here application orchestrator is another service. To do a full, so we have sort of, each one has what we call the merge, where this is basically just doing some GitHub things. And then this is the one that deploys the infrastructure. Then we also have kind of this merge stage for the code, for the Lambda code. And then this one does the actual build and deploy of the Lambda code.
Okay, so just another stupid question. I haven't used CircleCI. In this case, this means that this is one pipeline, and the one pipeline triggers different workflows that are part of that pipeline.
So the way we've set it up, we've sort of created this aggregation. So it's all kind of parameterized. So in this case, we are doing kind of the full infrastructure and code. So it's kind of modular in that respect. And when we dive into the code, we might be able to, hopefully it'll be clearer. But then each one of these has its own little sub pipelines. So that's one of the nice things about. So we'll show when we actually look at the code, the YAML code. You can kind of see a little bit more of that. So like the build. So just to step back for a second, every kind of run in CircleCI has a bunch of stuff that just happens at first. It spins up the environment. So each one of these is a Docker container. By default, you can use their Docker environment. There's also a way that you can run them. You can run the workers in your own infrastructure if you wanted to. And they got environment variables. Attaching workspace is a way that we can share information between these pipelines. Then it does the checkout code, installing anything like we install AWS CLI so we can do some AWS things. It has caching. Obviously, we're not doing a good job here with that. And then it can. This is the last stage. It's actually deploying the Lambda and sending Slack notifications.
Okay, cool. Then.
So you want to jump into some code?
I would say so. Let's jump into some code.
Okay. So again, just we have the top of our. Oops.
I assume that this is not open source because this is proprietary code.
Source.
That's okay.
So don't look too close.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out.
No, but there's nothing super secret here. But I'm not going to share the repo. But so we have the top level config, and the first part is just setting up the defaults for all these parameters. So we basically have for all these are basically for each of our services. And then the work happens here. As you mentioned, the orbs. So you just declare an orb, and it's like saying import this code. And then it's available. Here we're actually using something from that split config. So this is a job. And so this is kind of like calling the function with these parameters.
Okay.
And so the split config does this thing. So basically, effectively what the split config does is it's effectively reading in all the CircleCI configs from all the sub projects and sort of mushing them together and generating a config file. And then the path filtering is where, based on a regex, it's saying, okay, for if anything changes in services API handler, run the thing we generated in the split config with this parameter, run code API handler true. So that's how we're telling it to, since it changed in here, run the CircleCI config for this service. And we have that for all our services. These are the Terraform ones, and these are the Lambda ones.
Cool. That would essentially also give me the possibility to start multiple workflows in that case, right?
So
yeah.
If there were multiples of these were changed, it would fire off all the ones that had changes, which is, you definitely could do that. Usually we don't, but it would do that. Okay. So that's the.
And this is a path filtering thing. So okay. Good. Essentially, that would mean that, I don't know, if we have a team that needs to review all changes in the DB folder, which you don't have here, right? So I'm making this up, right? You have a piece where you're storing all of your infrastructure as code for databases, and you have a team that wants to review that piece. You could trigger off a separate workflow that would inform them or create something for that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah. As you can see, this is the infrastructure. We have, the way we've organized it is we have it, again, per service, and then we have a platform one.
Okay. But it still means that if you have a new service that gets added, you will also need to update this CircleCI workflow here. So it does not automatically discover new services or new functionalities.
Right. And at the end, when we talk about things we want to do and could use help with, that'll be one of them.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then how does the code of that workflow look like? Or did you want to show more config pieces or?
Well, so this is figured the next thing to show would be one of the services, the CircleCI config for one of the services, and this both we can show. So basically, a CircleCI has a workflow and jobs, And so if you remember, we had like the merged and this first one gets fired off no matter what. So here's where we do the testing, the any security testing stuff we do, like the sync. And here is where the logic happens. You can have these when statements. And if you remember, we passed in that code, that parameter that says this is the run the code for page OCR code build. So if this will execute if this is true and it's not being called from the API. So you can build these kind of complex logic statements here to trigger a workflow. And so we have several workflows with different logic. So this one pretty much gets run whenever so that would have been run potentially when it's not a main branch. And then these workflows are when it is main. So we have it broken up into, this is what happens when you first do the merge, the merge from PR, and then you have one that's for the code only, and then below it, it's one for code for infrastructure and one for infrastructure and code. So again, this will be one of the things I talked about where we wish we want to fix some of this. This is not really super dry, but right now it works. So what actually happens is the job. So if you pass through this logic, it'll then run these jobs. And if we, so this like does the building of the image. In this case, this is a Docker image for Lambda. So we can do both Docker images and zip images.
So what is your most preferred way in this case?
So preferred is zip. We're only doing Docker like when we have really big dependencies, like this page OCR. It has some really big, like I think we're putting in OpenCV and stuff like that. But most of our things are just zip files.
Okay.
So now, again, what's going to happen here is we have sort of this modular system. So we're saying we're going to run the job PY container, but if you notice, really, it's just got a bunch of parameters. So this actually we have a set of common files to support all this stuff. So these are like supporting files, and the one we just looked at is the PY app builder. So you can think of this as like packages and modules. So this is our module for doing the building of the application. So this is where we actually do the work. So in CircleCI, the work is done by steps. So we get to say, okay, this is going to run in a Python Docker container. And we're using Python 3.8. And then this is the actual work. So we kind of do some tagging. And then here we say we're doing the poetry build. And these are still, again, calling out to sub modules or sub functions that we have in another file.
Okay, but this is stuff that partly comes out of the box from CircleCI and partly has been built by you and the team at the end. So you can, this is shortcuts at the end.
Yeah, so, or you can think of it as modularization. So because all our different services all do the same thing, right? We have to build it and create it. So these become functions that are called. So we build it, we create it, we upload it to S3, we create the version assets in S3, and then the next function will actually update it to we're back to the page OCR version. So and we have, this is where we can do the actual deployment to the Lambdas and stuff like that. And then this is the version that does the the Terraform plan and apply and some overhead stuff. And then we have a path that does both code and Terraform.
That's the deployment part at the end.
Yeah. Well, so again, you can go through this and either just deploy the code or just deploy Terraform or do both. And this is one area where, as I mentioned, it'd be nice to figure out how to make this more dry. So the flexibility of the CircleCI allows us to have these kind of jobs and containers and to have a certain amount of kind of like functions that you can call, but like we can't, like ideally we'd have a function of all these jobs for code and all the jobs for Terraform and just be able to call that. We don't know a way to do that right now. So that's why we're repeating these kind of big stanzas to get these different patterns of. So, and then this is the lowest level. These are like the functions that are being called, like Slack notify. So, here we're actually doing kind of work. Or, let's see, what's another good one? These are those sync processes for security.
So these are at the end then the lowest level of implementation code, which is then shell code, shell steps at the end that will be executed as part of this workflow. Okay.
Yeah. So in CircleCI, like this is where so this would be like a shell command.
Okay.
Right here.
Would there be a possibility to execute this locally, so that you could run the workflows on your developers' desks as well?
There is a way, yes. So CircleCI does have a local executor. We're not using that because, again, so much of our stuff happens in the cloud. But at the previous company, we used that. So that is an option.
Okay, cool.
So I think that's the code walkthrough pretty much. And
we now know that you deploy to US West 2. And you are not multi-region, as far as I see the code. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but it's on our roadmap to be multi-region.
Oh, cool.
The design is adequate for multi-region, but of course, as you probably know, multi-region is non-trivial.
And it's not always required, actually, to be honest, right? Depends on where your customers are at the end.
And you work with banks, so you know how finicky they can be.
Yes. There's one thing that we did not really talk about. How do you inject secrets and stuff like that? So I think we saw some steps to set up AWS credentials and things like that. How do you inject them into CircleCI?
So it's pretty much we use SSM and secret store to store them, and Terraform to pretty much inject them.
Okay. So it means that you read them from Terraform, or you only use Terraform to do deployments, and you don't use any AWS CLI or things like that.
So like I said, sort of the Terraform creates the infrastructure, and that would include the secrets.
Okay.
And then the secrets can be either passed in through environment variables, or we're moving more towards the startup of the Lambda should really pull them in from SSM. Okay.
And I saw Slack over there. This is how developers will get notifications about successful or failed workflow?
Yes, that's the primary way. We also have, that's still the stages where we were doing the Git version tag stuff, also sends out sends something, actually, I think to Git, so that it does a commit update with the new version, and they get a notification from GitHub as well when the new but that's for the new version, so they can know what the version ID is, but the notification about if the success or failure of the run comes from Slack.
Okay. And now a bonus question, which I have not asked to anyone else attending this show yet. Do I see something like execution matrix, DORA matrix in CircleCI? Because I've not looked at CircleCI at all, right? So trying to get into how do I find out the deployment frequency for your different services? Is this something that you have kind of available out of the box? And if you don't know, just let me know, right? And we didn't plan for this.
Something, yeah. Well, we've been thinking about that. I believe there's some orbs that will help with that. You need to have something that you can have that go into. So you have to have some other, stats or. So that's something we do want to do, but we're not really doing that yet.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is there any other stuff you wanted to show from a coding perspective or from a sharing perspective?
Just a quick one is that sort of related to a little bit to what you're saying. It's not really doors or anything, but we do have this thing. One of the first things we're doing, which is again if you saw where we're playing with versions and stuff. One of the things is I mentioned we're saving it to SSM. That gives us the ability to do this dashboard where we can see the current what's been deployed for all the different environments. So these are the versions of the service and the infrastructure, and there's a way to kind of look at history as well.
Okay, and so this then talks to AWS, or is this metadata from the deployments? This talks to AWS.
Well, the deployments are pushing the information to SSM.
Okay,
and then I think we're pulling it, or we're doing something with CloudWatch. I forgot now. But
that's cool. But this is at the end an inventory of your deployed environments and what is where, right? So this is something that you kind of get out of your pipeline as well.
Yes. And one thing I didn't put in my future thing, but one thing we're really looking at is to make this into kind of a manifest-driven process. So today we've got all these versions of all the components, but we don't have a manifest. What we'd like is you'd be able to have a manifest of all the versions that you want for a deployment, and that's authoritative. That would set the versions authoritatively, and that manifest itself would be a Git asset that's versioned itself. So that would become a version of your infrastructure or description of all the versions that's in a version of your infrastructure. So that's one of the next.
Yeah, that makes sense. Projects. Cool. Let's move over again to not sharing screen, that I can somehow put you in the spotlight a little bit better than if you're sharing a screen. And
stop sharing the screen. Kind of lost.
Okay. Thank you so much for this overview of your pipeline. Now, the interesting questions is always, what do you think that you need to improve next as part of the pipeline? So we've seen a lot of stuff that is pretty cool, right? But I'm an engineer as well. I'm never happy with what I build, right? So what would be your top one thing that you want to change as part of your current pipeline?
Just one thing. So like I kind of harped on, you can see that it's kind of verbose. And so getting that, don't repeat yourself, getting it more dry is a big goal. And we're kind of exploring ways to do that. We might be able to use orbs to do that, or to potentially programmatically, since we have this ability to kind of do dynamic configs, maybe programmatically generate some of that stuff. I don't know if we'll get there or not. But.
Okay. And number two?
So this is kind of more for, it's both CI and Monorepo. We want to start supporting shared libraries. So today we don't really have shared libraries. We're just getting started with that. And the issue there that's interesting is, so in a Monorepo, it's really one of the goals is that you can touch everything, right, in one release. But when you have shared libraries, they're shared, right? They're going to be shared between those services. So let's say, you're working on one thing, you say, I got to change this library. You potentially have now impacted other services. So we want to figure out a way with the CI where when you change a library, the library knows who's dependent on it and can trigger their tests. and coming up with tests that are meaningful in that context is the other part that's a little interesting. Because you really want to test, is the change in the library affected the dependents? So that's another big one.
Makes total sense, right? You would stay in the monorepo, but you want to make sure that you can, based on library change, also trigger other workflows and stuff like that. So I think that's what I'm hearing, and this is really something we need to we would need to look at from a monorepo perspective. I'm actually facing similar challenges right now, so it's really good to hear that that's not only on me. Where can people find you online? And maybe this is not open source, but do you have any other contributions open source wise that you would want to highlight, or stuff that people can learn about yourself as well?
So we have the informediq.com website has a blog where a little bit of stuff comes there. Also blogging on dev.to in the Amazon Community Builders. And we have kind of a Medium public, whatever they call that page for, our informed IQ. And I do plan to write this up and hopefully create an open source kind of playground version of it. Because I wish I had this I wish I had that when I started. So I'm hoping we can get that out.
This sounds awesome. And this would then also be on CircleCI. I think just maybe one last question on CircleCI.
Sure.
Is this a free version that you're using, or is this an enterprise version?
We're not using the free version. It's actually surprisingly inexpensive. They do have a free version. I mean, I'm pretty sure, limited by how many simultaneous builds you can do, I think is the way they do it. And they have something for open source. So if you have an open source project, I think they have either free or cheap or both. The way it works is what you pay for to get more is to get more parallel containers effectively, or bigger containers.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Rob. Anything else you would like to share with the audience, or you're done for today?
Again, if folks have any suggestions on how to accomplish, making things more dry, or they say, that's really stupid, you should do something like this, open to all that. Always like to say, you always can improve, and you always want to improve, so...
Yeah, then let me add your maybe Twitter and LinkedIn to the show note when I publish this on YouTube. Yep. And once again, thank you so much for being my guest today and for sharing the stuff that you have built. I can see the passion in it, right? And I think that's what we all have with the stuff that we do. So let's keep doing that, and let's keep sharing knowledge.
I hope so. This is really fun. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rob.
All righty. Bye-bye.